Hello, this is Ronald White, and for my second use case, I'm going to go over a requirement that was a QuickBooks to Salesforce integration that I met with a previous client using Informatica Cloud. Some background. This client wanted to move invoicing activities from QuickBooks to Salesforce. Tragically, they still wanted to stay in QuickBooks for financials, so there was kind of a two-pronged approach. The first was the cutover or implementation, and the second was the ongoing batches that were going to keep these two systems in sync. And that is the essence of this requirement, was to synchronize data between the two systems at the account, invoice item, and invoice line item level. So what I'm going to focus on in this video is just a single unit of work within the larger ongoing micro batch to demonstrate how to meet this requirement in Informatica Cloud and SnapLogic. But I'm also going to get into some of the Informatica Cloud nuances because they are numerous. Informatica Cloud, in my one man's opinion here, did not have a viable product and really don't, and they won't until about Q3 this year. And there's a lot of reasons that I say that. The biggest one is they have a native integrated developer environment for the first time in their future state release that's actually rolling out now. They have an application called Power Center, and they have an application called Mapping Templates, which is another word for Microsoft Visio plugin. So they have these fragmented environments. There's actually a lot of baggage associated with this product out in the field, in my opinion. And I'll go into the Visio plugin specifically for the demo. And also, their web services connector is nuanced. The first version of their connector was atrocious. It was terrible. The version 2 of their connector, they've been trickling it out to customers strategically because it's been well known that it's been very bad for some time. The new connector actually does basic stuff that you would expect a web services connector to do. Similarly, the grid capabilities are brand new too. Up until just a month or so ago, you could only have one agent that could not be executed grid style. You had terrible web services connectivity. You had a Microsoft Visio plugin as an IDE or Power Center as an IDE all up until a month or so ago. And within the Informatica Cloud product itself, there's a lot of overlap with their legacy product suite. A good example is Informatica Data Quality. There's overlap there with Power Center. There's also overlap there with Informatica Cloud. And really, at the end of the day, the Informatica Cloud Enterprise solution is to purchase Power Center. I encourage you to watch the video, but here's a quick summary of some of the stuff that just kind of jumped out to me as I went through it. On the Informatica Cloud Services side, their viability is very, very recent. The product's very difficult to troubleshoot. I think the interface is extremely clunky. The wizard is sophomoric, and tragically, if you're using Informatica Cloud, you're spending most of your time with that 6-step wizard. And it's really not an enterprise solution. Now, over on the SnapLogic side, you're going to see, of course, developer productivity. This was probably close to a 10-time increase, but that's mostly because of the bizarre design patterns that I had to use in Informatica Cloud, that I find myself using in Informatica Cloud. But another thing that you're going to see is that it's simple, but it's simple with options. Meaning, and you'll see this in the demo, I could have pulled in 2 Salesforce read snaps and I could have done a join. But I know how to write SOQL. So I just pulled in the SOQL snap and wrote some SOQL. It's a great option as a developer to have. It's also an option that's not only not available in Informatica Cloud, it's not available in Informatica Power Center. If you have any questions about the material, or you'd just like to talk through some of this in any more detail, feel free to use this contact information at your discretion. So we're going to jump into Informatica Cloud here. One thing to note up front is this is actually the advanced or pre-release rather URL. And the reason why I'm using that is the product offering at Informatica Cloud has, I used to joke that it changes every quarter. It changes very often. And this URL gives you a full view of everything that's in the pipeline, I think up to Q4. There may even be an alpha in here, but beta for sure. So you can see that there's a lot of Informatica Cloud apps. This contact validation, this is redundant with their Informatica data quality product, and to a lesser extent their address doctor product. The data assessment is essentially a profiling tool. Data masking is obfuscation. The data synchronization, this is where you spend 95% of your time working in PowerCenter Cloud, or Informatica Cloud. And there's a lot of nuances within this particular app, and this is where we're going to spend most of our time. These mapping configurations and PowerCenter apps are actually just required by fact that for 10 years they've been steering people to PowerCenter or to these silly, absurd, in my opinion, templates that were actually a Microsoft Visio plugin. No kidding. You had to use Microsoft Visio to do anything advanced in this tool up until a couple weeks ago. And on that topic, the web services connector, the version 1 of the web services connector is absolutely atrocious. Never to be used under any circumstances. It's really that terrible. Their version 2 was a complete rewrite, and it's actually decent. You can actually talk to a SOAP-based web service. So keep that in mind, and this is something that Box went through. When you're evaluating Informatica Cloud, you have to evaluate current state and future state. And that's why I'm showing you this particular org, though I won't go through the demo on this org, just so you can get an idea of all the different options that are actually there. So this drop down under design, this is where you see the integration templates. This mappings area is where they finally have an IDE. So this is not bad when you consider where they came from, but again, I would say, personal opinion, far from good. And you'll see when it loads up now, you finally have these basic transformations that you can use, that this did not exist until a couple weeks ago. And what that means is that you couldn't do something as simple as pull in 2 sources up until a couple weeks ago. You have to define your source, which I don't have any connections defined, which is going to produce a list of fields. And you're still in the business of mapping fields from transformation to transformation. You still, and the reason for that is because in the background, Informatica Cloud really is just essentially a web interface to Informatica PowerCenter. So that's it for the advanced release or the pre-release of Informatica Cloud. And now we're going to hop over to a project that I did for a previous client, where what they wanted to do was they wanted to get out of QuickBooks for invoicing. They wanted to manage all their invoices and all of their inventory within Salesforce, but they still wanted to do their financials in QuickBooks. And what that translated to on the ground was I needed to build a bunch of implementation tasks to get the data from QuickBooks into Salesforce and also link the data between the 2 systems. Though they were going to use Salesforce for managing invoices and items moving forward, because they were going to use QuickBooks for financials, those invoices and items had to be reflected in QuickBooks. So what you're looking at here is a set of tasks for the implementation. And the other set of tasks here is what you're looking at for the ongoing or production batch. And this is what keeps QuickBooks and Salesforce in sync on a day-to-day basis. But one of the things you might notice as you kind of look through this design pattern is I'm doing a lot of flat file to flat file transformations. And these are all very similarly named jobs. And their names are similar because they're doing similar things. Let me show you what I mean. If you jump into the 6-step wizard, this is all you get. Your 6 simple steps. You define the operation in the name. You pick a source. you pick a target, and you pick a filter. You only get one source, you only get one target, and you only get a source filter. And this is where you do most of your work. It's pretty straightforward. You can use auto match. It's the same deal that you see in the other middleware products. Auto match is used with caution. Most of the time you're dragging and dropping from one side to the other. The concept of the mapping really only exists within the context of this expression. And what you're seeing here, this notation here, is a lookup. So there's no concept of aggregation, there's no concept of joining, but they do have the concept of a lookup. And this is not unlike what you'll see in MuleSoft. One of the problems I've always had with this is I can't copy this text, I can't select this. And the reason why that's a big deal is because, keeping in mind that this is PowerCenter in the back end, developing in PowerCenter, you always have to kind of refresh to the session to get the latest copy of the mapping. And that kind of pattern actually is visible in here, though if you're not familiar with PowerCenter, you wouldn't pick up on it. Suffice it to say, you'll find yourself hitting refresh fields a lot, which will actually go hit your source and target and bring it back. If it happens that this field or anything that constitutes this lookup has changed, you're actually going to lose this expression right here, and you're going to have to rewrite it, which may not be a big deal if you're hot and heavy in the middle of this, but believe me, if you've been away from it for a week or two and you look over here and this is blank, you're really going to be banging your head against the wall trying to remember what it was doing, let alone going into here and actually clicking through all this junk to get it to come through again. So that's about all you can really do with the 6-step wizard. And again, this was their product. This was the only IDE they had for 10 plus years. Blows my mind even just to think about that still to this day. And then the schedule tab, these are all pretty basic stuff. You can do verbose logging, you can pass in parameters, you can do pre-processing and post-processing commands, you can email a failure notification, then you can assign a schedule. Some control on what you can set up. Or you just do not run it on a schedule and it's just manual runs. So that really is my overview of the 6-step wizard, but I kind of want to go back to the constraints that you're forced with here. So I am pulling from a source to a target. I have nothing to filter, but what I'm doing here is I'm actually pulling in the invoice. So the only reason why I pulled in the invoice is my requirement is I need not bother send an account over that doesn't have an invoice. But since I couldn't do that in one flow, as simple as it sounds, I had to do it in another. So here in the second one, you'll see I'm pulling from that source. I'm writing to a target that's exactly the same. What I'm actually filtering for is that invoice. And then these are just straight one-to-one mappings. My point with this is just to basically highlight the fact that the 6-step wizard is very, very limited in what it can accomplish. So now I want to look at a more specific use, and this was one where I actually had to use a integration template. Now, the integration templates, we'll take a look at product here. This is the Informatica Cloud IDE for all practical purposes for 10 years. You do not have Microsoft Visio, you do not have access to this. So keep that in mind. I'm simply joining invoice line items in Salesforce, products in Salesforce. I'm making sure that I'm only picking products that have an invoice line item associated with them. And then I'm making sure I only get a single list of products, filter, and I'm writing it to the target. Now, the one thing you may notice about this is, where the heck are these? What are these? How do I know this is Salesforce? How do I, what kind of target is this? What is this filtering? And what is actually moving between these different transformations? So each object has a set of properties that you must fill in. Now, Informatica Cloud wants you to define a schema, but it's not reading from Salesforce. It has no idea what the schema is. Be that as it may, you must define a schema. And yes, this pops off the screen every single time. You must define a schema, which means I have to actually define my ports, which have to be defined exactly as they appear in this case, my Salesforce instance. Otherwise, this will fail. So think about what you're doing here. In the real world, you're logged into Salesforce as an admin. You're under your customization, or you create a custom object, and you're actually copying the field names into this tool. And you have to do it one by one. So you define all your ports. Once they're defined, thank goodness, you can just pass all, but they do have to be defined. And the joiner, again, this would make sense if you're familiar with Power Center. If you're not, this is probably gibberish. But these are all Power Center settings. The join type. I got a join type of hey yo. So, you can make, my point in showing you that is you can make a lot of mistakes. And Informatica, the template doesn't know, right? I know because I've used this enough. You can't do anything that's complex. And you would have to make the argument that joining two sources together and filtering and aggregating is complex. It's not. But you cannot do that with the 6-step wizard. And if you try to do it in Visio, you're in for a very painful experience. Switching back to the application, what I have to do here, I have to create a new integration template. I have to upload it. Then I actually have to create a new app, which is called a mapping configuration. And within this mapping configuration, I actually have to specify my runtime environment, and then I actually have to select the template I just loaded up. So one thing to point out here, and a very simple example of some place where I'm doing some kind of conversion. I believe this is one. Sure. There's a couple things to notice here. First of all, what the heck is QuickBooks ID3? I have no idea. I have to look in the expression to figure out what it is. And I can see here, oh, it's coming from the invoice line item. That's great. Second of all is if I'm doing any kind of conversion here, and here's an example. Of course, this is very simple. Let's say I wanted to do just some basic date conversion. There's a very common use case. Dates come in all different formats, and we want to get them to look the same. And let's say that I make my dates in that format. Now, I haven't profiled all my data. I maybe just looked at a couple fields and I saw that format in there. There's no way for me to see this data. This doesn't execute. There's no debug environment here. The only way that I will know if this works is to actually go in and run the job and see if it fails. It means that when you have to debug and you have to troubleshoot, you're either putting the session in verbose mode and digging through the logs, or you're swapping out your targets and writing to files so you can look at the data. And in conclusion, I've done a couple projects in Informatica Cloud. I've done an implementation, a cutover from QuickBooks. I've done Salesforce backup jobs. I've done some web services stuff with Informatica Cloud. And all I can tell you is that it's extremely painful to use as a developer. And I'm over here in Snap, and I decided to just kind of redo that use case I showed you with the integration template in Informatica Cloud. And instead of using the same pattern that I did there, it just made more sense to use a SQL object. So because there's a relationship between line item, account, and product, I just wrote a SQL query directly into this Snap, do some simple data mapping, and then write the file. And you can see here that I get exactly what I need to get, which is the account that has a product out the output of the data mapper. I was forced down a design path with Informatica Cloud that really wasn't productive at all. And I was able to do this in Snap in really all of 5 minutes. So I think this is just another great example of how much easier it is to do stuff in Snap. Also, too, easy, but not so easy that you can't do basic stuff like write a SQL query. Here I'm writing a query that's actually traversing two different relationships. Certainly someone that's new to Salesforce wouldn't be able to write this, but yet I picked this particular example just to demonstrate that yes, it's easy, but also you can do some fairly complicated stuff.